we are on. So, hi, this is Zofia Bajorek. I'm a research fellow at the Institute for Employment Studies. IES is a UK-based independent centre for research and consultancy in employment policy and HR practice. We are very lucky to have here with us today David Blanchflower, the esteemed labour economist and academic, and he's in the UK at the moment promoting his new book, Not Working, Where Have All the Good Jobs Gone? So IES has a keen interest in David's work, as we have recently published several evidence-based reports looking at corresponding issues, including working with JP Morgan Chase Foundation regarding a project looking at progression in employment. We undertake qualitative analysis of individuals working in the gig economy for BAYS, and we produce our own monthly analysis of the labour market statistics. So David, thank you firstly for taking time to talk with us in your really busy schedule today. I understand you're running to the BBC after this.
I'm always running. So
it's great that you've given us time to do this. So if I could just start with my first question. So at the end of your book, so I'm doing like you did, start from the back, go into the beginning. You say in quite a human way that people are hurting and they want good jobs. So how would you define a good job?
Well, I think a good job actually is really about a secure job that pays well, has enough hours. That's really what this is about. And I've been looking at Gallup. Gallup says they've been out for about 100 years looking at the world, and the one thing they've discovered in all this time is people want good jobs. Good jobs make people happy. They're able to buy things, they're able to feel secure. But I think it's about having enough hours and enough money that you feel able to survive and cope. And that's really been a really big struggle over the last decade or so. And we get to 2019 and people are still struggling. And what we see in the world is lots of evidence of hopelessness and isolation and anxiety and depression. We don't see enough good jobs, and if we had them, I think those things would be much less than they are now.
So at the moment we have Matthew Taylor promoting what he is saying good quality work. Now, do those two things go hand in hand?
I think they probably do. The big evidence is actually that people are they're underemployed in a couple of ways. They can't get enough hours, but they also can't get jobs that they're suited for. So what we see is particularly young people are entering the job pyramid lower down than they would like to. So you've got a degree, you end up doing a job that's less than you're capable of. It's something like someone with a high school diploma or A-levels or something would have. So good jobs really are having enough hours, having enough pay, but also being able to fulfill what you're able to do. You've done all this education, you've taken on this huge loan, and then are you getting a return for it? So a lot of it's that, and good jobs, good work make people happy.
Which is what we want.
Exactly.
So you talk a lot about the concept of labour market slack. Could you summarise what you mean by this? And I suppose, more importantly, why policymakers should be paying more attention to it?
Well, labour market slack is a sort of concept that labour economists like me think about. But what it means is how much available resources are there out there that you can use. So an example would be if there's a high unemployment rate, there are people out there out of work who would like to work. So that's an example of spare resources that you could use. So it could count people who are who are unemployed. It could also count people who are neither unemployed nor employed. They've left the labour force, they're at home looking after the kids, say. But if the labour market was to improve, they would come in because the jobs under offer would be better. That's what I mean by labour markets. And particularly I mean people who say, I'm working 20 hours a week, I'd like to work 30. That's a level of slack that the economy can use. So it's really what's available out there for an economy to use in terms of people that's available. So in a recession, that slack rises, and as we go into a recovery, that slack falls, and eventually at some point, almost all the slack's used up, and we call that full employment, and then wages start to rise. And the answer right now is we're quite a long way away from full employment because there's still quite a lot of slack, not really being picked up by the unemployment rate, but still lots of slack in the economy. People doing jobs they're not suited for, people not having enough hours. That's the slack we see.
And so what are policymakers to do about this?
Well, it's a good question. I just think they should be, well, I call it, put the pedal to the metal. Get the economy to run hot. Stop raising interest rates. Stop imposing austerity. Start to invest in the infrastructure. Get the economy humming again. And the famous phrase used by Beveridge, who basically set up the rules about what full employment is, he says, get to the point where workers are standing by, waiting for nice job offers to come in that they can choose between. And so the question is, well, do people right now see that? Of course they don't. So we'll get to a point where suddenly the balance of power essentially shifts from employers to workers. And you certainly would argue right now, employers have a lot of the balance of power. Think of 0 hours contracts. Some people like them, but some people don't like them. Well, if we get to full employment, the employer can't impose 0 hours contracts. And the worker says, well, I'm not having that anymore. You either hire me and give me 40 hours a week, or you don't, I'm going somewhere else. And there's a choice, and the worker has a place to go to. So that's what I mean.
Brilliant. So political leaders on both sides of the Atlantic are keen to point to the so-called jobs miracle. So how justified are they in doing so? And are there important indicators of labour market success which they are ignoring?
Yeah, in the UK what we've seen is quite a considerable growth in employment. So people in the UK talk about a jobs miracle, but the workers don't seem to know that. Most people, you're shaking your head, right? I mean, most people don't get that. They don't feel this is a miracle. So what other measure is there? Well, in the UK, we'll stick with the UK for now, the average pay packet today buys you 6% less than it did in 2008. So it's not much of a miracle, more like a disaster. People can't buy what they used to be able to buy. They're struggling. Even if people are on minimum wages, they can't get enough hours. So we've seen a rise of minimum wages at the low end. But basically the jobs miracle hasn't translated into a I'm paid a lot miracle, because people aren't. So when I go around, I do what I call the economics of walking about. And I go around and talk to people and I say to them, so the jobs miracle's great, you're all absolutely doing fine, aren't you? And they look at you incredulously, shake their heads as you're doing right now, and say no. Oh, and the other thing is, in the US, we actually haven't seen a jobs miracle at all. So in the US, the employment rate, which is just take 40-year-olds and say, here's a bunch of 40-year-olds, what proportion of them are employed? The answer is that rate is 2.5% today, less than it was in 2008. So there isn't a jobs miracle in America. To get back to where you were, you need about 7 million more jobs. So in the UK, there's essentially a jobs, not much of a miracle. And in the US, there isn't a job miracle at all. There's other things we care about, but basically that doesn't look like full employment, even though the policymakers, the central banks and everyone say, oh great, we're at full employment. We're not.
One thing I noticed when I was reading your book was actually the quite human aspect that you had, the consideration for people's well-being, the impact that you were describing. I think the 13 effects of joblessness or unemployment, including depression and the impact on well-being. And it was, I thought, quite enlightening. You don't often hear that from economists.
Well,
so I was really thankful for
well,
that.
Well, can I just respond? I mean, economics is supposed to be a dismal science, but actually, a lot of what I've done is to try and think about happiness and well-being. And one of the things that you see is a sort of bipolar world. I mean, think of the elites and the non-elites. So maybe we can look at the elites, the exam-taking classes, let's say, or who've done pretty darn well. But then you have to look at everybody else. And why did people vote for Brexit? Why did they vote for Trump? Why did they vote for Le Pen? And mostly it's from communities that are hurting on any measure: low life expectancy, heavy drinking rates, all sorts of low wages. So communities that are hurting have looked at other people and seen that they're doing quite fine. So relative things matter. But essentially what we've seen in this recovery is rising levels of hopelessness, helplessness, isolation. And I think in the US, famously documented by Deaton and Case, is this enormous rise in deaths of despair, which is about particularly prime age, less educated folk dying from over drinking, suicide, opioid crises. And now we're seeing the IFS and Deaton Case coming to the UK, starting to say that's coming here. And a crucial thing to look to is that in both the US and the UK in the last couple of years, life expectancy is falling. We've seen for the last 50 years till now, every year life expectancy rises. So we as economists should be mindful of the fact, I mean, I say to everybody, be mindful of the fact that if we were at full employment, why would so many people be hurting? Yeah. Think of people in the coal fields. I mean, people in the coal fields in Yorkshire voted for Brexit. People in English seaside towns voted for Brexit. Well, why? Maybe not even thinking that Brexit would actually transform their lives. It's just somebody somewhere has to take account of the fact that we're hurting. Listen, please. So it was a lot of listen, please. And even in the last 3 years, people don't appear to have been listening.
No. It's a shame, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So IES do a lot of work about the health and well-being of the working age population, which is why I was really interested in that well-being section, which leads on to my next question, in that we actually hear a lot about the importance of job quality and job satisfaction and that link to precarious work. So what does your book have to say about the links between this insecure work and insecure workforce, underemployment, and then the connections with workforce well-being?
I think it's a great question. I think one of the big things that I've learned reading for this book and researching this book is workers really care about job security. They're even prepared to trade off some wages for it. Insecurity in your job is a really big deal. The chance that you may lose your job is a really big fear. And I think it's changed since '08 because people have seen insecurity in their houses, in their pensions. So a secure job is a really good deal. Big deal. Think back to at the beginning of this interview, we started to talk about good jobs. Perhaps I should have said then, a good job is a secure job. The other thing, if I go back in fact to the well-being work that I've done, if you pick one thing that you've learned in well-being work, it's jobs make people happy, and secure jobs make people especially happy. Conversely, unemployment in everything we ever see conveys unhappiness. So a decent, secure job is central to this book. And a well-paid job. And what we've seen is, especially for the less educated, those well-paid, secured jobs have basically gone. They've gone from manufacturing, they've gone from steel, they've gone from coal, and actually they've gone from construction too. So there were a lot of jobs there. So we've seen that insecurity, which, surprise, surprise, reflects itself in right-wing populism, because they say, enough, what about me? And that's perfectly sensible.
Despite in the UK our high employment rate, we have seen, and economists keep on talking about, that the UK has the persistent problem with low productivity. So what levers do you think employers can pull to help improve this situation?
Well, the simple answer to that is pay your workers more. In some sense, the big problem we have is that workers have no great incentives to be highly productive. And in a sense, the worry is that even if you make the firm more profitable, what might well happen is the firm makes more money, makes more profits, and it all goes to the CEO. It doesn't go to the workers. So workers don't have a great deal of incentive to actually respond and make things productive. The big thing that we would see is that firms can invest in workers training to help productivity, invest in them making their jobs more secure, and giving workers an incentive to participate with the firm so that output increases and efficiency increases benefit everybody. That used to be something that unions could do. Source of productivity increase could come from the workers, but investing in workers, giving them greater stability, greater understanding that they're going to be with the firm and can get benefits from the trade going forward, that appears to be the way to go. And you guys like all that stuff. Invest in the workers. That seems like a good line.
You say that policymakers aren't learning the messages from the past. So what do you think will actually make them listen and learn to the important messages from your book?
I just think that full employment's a really big deal. So the balance of power has really moved in this insecure world. It's moved to employers. Employers have taken the benefits and gains to themselves. And they, in a sense, they've changed the world such that firms have got workers who aren't underemployed, and in the same firms there are underemployed people, and those underemployed people are kind of keeping the other people down. The difference in the past is that pay was kept down because of unemployment by unnamed, unknown people out there. Now what's happened is that the people who are not underemployed know the names and know the faces of those in the same workplace. So I think in a sense the balance of power is shifting. Give incentives for people to work, give incentives for firms to hire them, and give incentives for them to keep them on for relatively long time periods. I mean, what we've learned about the minimum wage is that actually, as you raise the minimum wage, better workers show up, workers remain for longer, and their productivity rises. So I think the story is about making a deeper attachment between workers and firms, making workers more secure. But a simple way to do that is just crank the economy, get the economy rolling, and then what you'd find is that the balance of power shifts, and workers can get more because they can find another job someplace else. And the question is, why do the central banks and why have policymakers thought that we've got to stop that? And the answer is, they're worried about inflation, but we don't have any inflation. There's no sign of any inflation, and this is something of a bygone age. And there's a famous story which says this is the economics of the Maginot Line, which is that you build a defence for the last war. When this war comes, they just go round it. Well, this is the same thing. This is a lot about what happened in the 70s, where unions were strong. This is all about controlling inflation, but there isn't any. I mean, the reality is that the central bank can't create any. So what we're seeing here, once again, is policy failure.
And my last question is, we are in a bit of political turmoil at the moment, as we all know. So in a few weeks' time, if you found yourself in that enviable or unenviable position, to find yourself in a lift with the next Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, what would you say to convince them that good jobs matter and to have it as a policy point?
Oh, golly gee. I mean, that means I've got 33 seconds at most.
Yes. Your lift speech.
My lift. I just think you should concentrate on actually trying to deliver decent jobs and decent wage increases. And if you made that the central focus, actually markets would like it. I mean, the standard thing I say to people is actually, and I said it on a program the other day, the great thing is about the markets is they stop politicians doing stupid stuff. And actually rewarding workers is not stupid stuff, it's good stuff. And it's likely to actually get you votes. So I would start to focus on, instead of let's give tax cuts to billionaires and millionaires, let's think about trying to give incentives for workers in Wakefield, Scunthorpe, Bridgend, places where we're seeing these plants close. Start to think about ordinary people, and that might be a really kind of sensible thing to do, but I have no hope that at this moment that they would listen.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time today,
Sure.
and we wish you all the best with the promotion of your book. So thank you very much.
Thank you much for having me.
Thank you.